Good afternoon, everyone. I have some house cleaning things I'd like to just mention before we get started. I'm going to ask everyone if you could turn on your cameras at this time. That would just help us in facilitating the session. I'd like to welcome you to a wonderful event this afternoon. This event is being brought to you on behalf of the College of Fine, Performing, and Communication Arts and the Office of Multicultural Student Engagement. Brings this special conversation for Coming Out Week. Wayne State alumnus, Dr. John Hunter, along with his husband, Dr. Harold Kudin, will share their personal coming out stories. The couple will reflect on their interracial relationship, John's career as an artist and advocate for the arts, as well as Harold's work as an LGBTQ activist, and his thoughts on resilience. I'd also like to thank Allison, Patrick, and Anne for their work in today's session. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have in our Zoom meeting today, Dean John Corvino with the Honors College. I now would like to pass the virtual mic to the Dean of the College of Fine and Performing and Communication Arts, Matthew Seeger, to provide the introduction for our guests today.
Thank you, Leo. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this introduction today. I want to thank our wonderful staff from Alumni Relations and Development for putting this event together and helping sponsor this event. And of course, everyone who has joined us today. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation. COVID-19, of course, has created a lot of challenges for us, but it's also created some unique opportunities. And one of those opportunities is for us to sponsor these kinds of Zoom meetings. So it's really a great opportunity. Today we engage with a really important topic, and we do so within the context of Coming Out Week. It's a great way to celebrate Friday of Coming Out Week with this particular presentation and this particular story. This is an adventure story. This is a story of discovery, and this is a love story. And so it has all the elements of a great bestseller and maybe a great movie, who knows. I'd like to introduce our two main characters who are also our narrators in this wonderful story. John Hunter has worked in museum management and is a faculty member and is an administrator in higher education. He's a native Detroiter, and in the 1960s and 1970s, he was a student at Wayne State University in the Monteith College and then later in the master's program, studying with some of our luminary painting faculty, principally Robert Wilbert and others. He served as an exhibition curator at the DIA and a professor of art and associate dean at Cleveland State University. Dr. Hunter is a practicing artist, a painter who currently resides in New York, where his work has been featured in several shows. His work explores what it means to be an African-American gay man. And over the years, I found his insights and his perspective and his friendship so helpful to me. So thank you, John, for participating today. Dr. Harold Kudin is a clinical psychologist who's been a leader, innovator, and advocate in a number of health-related issues with regard to the LGBT community. He has, since 1995, he has worked with the International Lesbian and Gay Association and the American Psychological Association. He's also been a member of the Association of Lesbian and Gay Psychologists and the National Gay Health Education Foundation, and the Mayor's Interagency Task Force on AIDS, and co-chair of the Committee on Lesbian and Gay Issues in Mental Health. He is the co-author of the volume Golden Men, The Power of Gay Midlife. Stories are very powerful. Coming out stories are powerful. Narratives reveal who we are. They help us learn, they help us understand, they help us encode our values and our beliefs. So please enjoy this wonderful, uplifting story. Thank you.
Yes, we're on now.
Yes.
Okay, John. So tell me something about yourself.
Thank you for asking. First of all, before I tell you something about myself, I want to tell the people who have joined us, and goodness gracious, we're so happy that you're here. I want to tell you how this is going to proceed in terms of Harold's and my conversation. We have about 45 minutes. And those of you who know us know that we can go on and on and on. So it's a little hard to sort of shoehorn ourselves into 45 minutes, but we're gonna give it a good try. There are three main topics that we want to cover in 45 minutes, and we'll devote about 15 minutes to each topic. And in that 15 minutes, each of us will have approximately 7 minutes to talk about whatever it is we want to talk about. And I'm going to try and keep track of the time, and I'm going to give Harold the, if I find that he is running over, and he's going to give me the, if he thinks that I'm drifting off topic and taking up too much time. So the three general areas that we're going to cover are, first, coming out. That is our own individual stories. The second section will be what we are calling decision points. That is, points in our lives where we changed direction, or we found a new direction. And then the third and final point will be our black and white marriage. So, just a little bit about myself. Thank you, Matt, for filling in a lot of information. I won't go over that again, but I am a native of Detroit. My parents were Detroiters, deceased now, of course. I'm an only child of their marriage, and a very spoiled one at that. I am currently 78 years old. I think that's very important for me to say. I'm married to Harold Kudin, and we have been married since 2011. We've been together since 2001. So this is our 19th year together. My parents were working class. Both had attained only high school education. But their wish for me was to go further than they were able to do, and to strive for a higher place, if you will, in life and in society than they were able to achieve. And that's woven into my story. So here we go. I'm timing myself. Coming out. For me, coming out was not an event. It's a process. It's a process that still goes on. It goes on every day. The extent to which I choose to reveal to other people my sexual orientation and my life situation, that is, that I'm seen oftentimes in public with my husband, not just this guy who happens to be with me, but he is, in fact, my husband. I must say the coming out has been a very, probably not an unusual situation relative to other people, but it is my own particular story. And having grown up in a heterosexual environment, I was expected to be heterosexual. That was what my parents impressed upon me. That was what my family impressed upon me. That's what my community had impressed upon me. And I thought that I would try to live up to being heterosexual, although at a very, very early age, probably in grade school, I suspected that I had a different interest than being heterosexual. I was attracted to other boys, ultimately to grown-up boys and men. But certainly for the first part of my life, I tried to live heterosexually. I had girlfriends. I had one girlfriend in particular through high school and undergraduate school. We even talked about getting married, and I thought we might, although I didn't see how that would happen, and I couldn't figure out how that would work. What changed everything for me was I went into the Army during the Vietnam era. I was a lieutenant in the infantry, and I served in Vietnam for a year. And it was in the Army that I met a man who became my first sexual encounter. This is in my early 20s. That's the first time I had a sexual encounter of any sort. I knew at that time that that satisfied me in a way that whatever heterosexual life had to offer would not. I just knew that. Although I persisted in having relationships with women, sexual relationships with women. And so there was this tug of war back and forth between, well, this or that. And it was towards the end of my stay in the Army, and I want to make that clear, it was the Army, you know. This was before don't ask, don't tell. I was asking and telling. By the end of the Army, I made up my mind I had to go in the direction that seemed most satisfying and comfortable to me, and I did. I've had in my life 3 different long-term partners, which I'll talk about later. But the coming out, having made this decision to be homosexual instead of heterosexual, I had to situate myself in the world. And first I had to admit to myself that I was gay, that I was homosexual. And that has been an ongoing task. I think I've pretty much have settled that part of it in my life. But then I had to come out to someone else that I trusted. And the first person I came out to really was a woman that I had met at Monteith. And we'd been friends ever since 1960. And I told her about this man that I had met in the Army. And her reaction was, oh, good for you. That encouraged me to share my orientation with other people. But rather than actually tell people, when I started living with my first long-term partner, I felt that that would explain to them what my situation was. He wasn't my roommate, which is what some people wanted to believe, especially my mother, and I will come to her in a moment. He wasn't my roommate. He was the man that I was in love with and living with and having sex with. So the real struggle for me was to be open with people who I was afraid to come out to. And one was this girlfriend that I had in high school and in college. And we had gone our separate ways for a period of time, and then somehow, I don't know if she called me, I think she called me, she was back in Detroit, and she wanted to get together, and we went to lunch one day. And we started talking about this thing and that thing, and she, out of the clear blue sky, said, John, how come you never got married? And I said, well, I never met the right woman. I've been busy with my career, bullshit, lots of bullshit. And she sat there and just kind of took it in. And I said, just a minute. I really need to tell you the truth. I'm gay. And her reaction was, oh, okay. That for me was a big turning point, that I could reveal this to a woman that, while we had never been sexually intimate, we were very close, planning to get married and all that sort of thing. But it was very helpful hearing that kind of reaction, experiencing that kind of reaction. So it was easier for me to live a gay life with a partner, not trying to conceal what that relationship was. That was my coming out, really. But the one person who stood in my way of coming out was my mother. And I have to quickly tell this story. I was living with my second partner. She and my father came to visit us in Cleveland. And she had been absolutely opposed to what was going on in terms of us living together, and very vocal about it. And we were sitting in the kitchen, just she and she said, you know, I'm going to have a stroke about this relationship. And at that moment, instead of being afraid of her and frightened about her reactions and her behavior, I said, honey, let me get my camera. I'm going to take a picture of you before you have your stroke so I can remember what you look like pre-stroke. And everything stopped for a moment and she started laughing. And that was the end of it. We never had any kind of contesting my sexuality or my lifestyle after that. Harold, I throw it to you. Tell me something about yourself and about coming out.
That was just 7 minutes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay, I'm 84 years old, born 1936. I describe myself as a secular Jew, gay man, white. I was born in Chicago, but raised in North Hollywood, California, a suburb basically of Los Angeles. I was the third child, and I would say it was a very middle-class family in terms of values. Financially up and down. My father was a musician, and then they got divorced, and then we became really strapped for money. I would say I had no support in a way intellectually, but my mother, who was a housewife until the divorce and then became a clerk in an office, her family was very middle-class, pretentious. All the men were physicians, and I was programmed to be a physician. My first toy I got was a toy doctor's kit when I was 5 years old. I went and did it my own way later on by becoming a PhD clinical psychologist. Now, coming out for me is a very different story. I was a very precocious, sexually precocious kid. When at 6 years old, I knew I was attracted to men. But I also knew I had to keep it completely and totally secret, so that it's what, at the time when gay liberation came out, the statement of every gay and lesbian child is basically an orphan, because they have to keep who they are secret from the people who supposedly are the closest ones to them. Now, I was very sexually active when I was 12 and 13. So it turned out at 14, I was arrested by the police. So the police were the ones who told my family about me. So my coming out was very different than most kids. And of course, my family reacted very, very negatively. No support whatsoever. And I stayed in California until I was 18, when I was no longer a ward of the court, and left to move to Chicago. And of course, by doing that, my family totally had no contact with me, but I needed to make that move so I could be who I was. And it also gave me an opportunity to find out who I was. And the coming out process, like John said, it's a process, it's not an event. And so I think it's important to realize that coming out for us is a constant, because yes, you come out first, to yourself, and then the family, and then maybe friends, and then is it professionally? Is it to your neighbors? And it's daily, in the sense when you're sitting in a plane and someone starts talking to you who's sitting next to you, do you come out to them? And that is a continual process, no matter how old you are and no matter where you are. It's always having that double consciousness of who I am, and then there's the image of me that people are relating to. And one of the things that really got me to come out to my closest friends, and not friends, but people I knew, was a relative I was already in my 30s, who I loved very much, a cousin. And when I told her that I was gay, she looked at me and said, "Oh, I've known for years." And then she said something that broke my heart. She said, "It just hurt me so much that you didn't trust me enough to tell me." And that was when I vowed I would never, ever keep who I was secret from someone that I cared about. And so coming out has been, as a therapist, it's been an issue that I've thought about at great length and have written about. And so I wrote a book dealing with it, but I also had to write about it recently when I was working on a paper of relating how coming out teaches us skills that we can use later on in our life. And in my book, I related that the skills we learned in coming out help us to deal with aging. Because when we age, we go into another reality, a world that people look at us differently. And I felt that what we learned in coming out, we can apply as we become middle age, because it gives us a foundation. And just recently, a colleague of mine had suggested that I incorporate those ideas into resiliency for dealing with COVID-19. And so I really worked on it to really show it very clearly what the coming out process is involved in. And there are 3 stages of it. The first is self-acceptance, which is not just simply recognizing who you are, but it's accepting it with the additional positive feeling about it. Because remember, my coming out was in a period back in the 50s and in the 60s where, yes, you knew you were gay, but you also knew you were illegal or immoral, or you were a scourge, and you were definitely an outsider. And so I wrote this speech, which we'll be presenting in the future. And anyone who's listening now, just go into the chat room and there's a PDF which you can download to get the speech, because I think it's important for those of us who are in the spectrum of LGBTQ to recognize we've learned stuff. We've had to challenge ourselves in coming out, and we've developed these skills so that these are skills we can use over and over and over again. And, I have another minute?
Finish your thought, but you're out of time.
Okay, so getting back to the coming out, the 3 aspects of coming out are self-acceptance, number 1. The second is community membership. It's identifying with the community of peers and feeling you are being accepted in it. And the last part is having hope and a positive sense of the future. So again, it's self-acceptance, community membership, and a belief in the future and that there is something good beyond.
Great. Okay, so we're going to move on to the second section, which will be decision points. And Harold, we're going to have to tighten this up a bit, okay?
Okay.
Both of us. All right, here we go. So, decision points. Decision points are, I'll reiterate, I'm 78 years old. A lot has happened in my life. It's hard to squeeze all that down to 7 minutes. So I just want to touch upon things that have occurred in my life that I recognize as redirecting me and changing my outlook, if you will, on life and where I want it to be. First of all, I was impressed with the importance of education by my parents. Both, as I said, both of whom only had high school education, but they impressed upon me that education was important. And I went to Wayne and I received my bachelor's and first master's degree at Wayne. And then later on, I went to the University of Michigan, that other school, to get a second master's and PhD in art history. And getting that education gave me a freedom to choose work in areas that I was interested in, but also freedom from the kind of bureaucracy and bossism, if you will, that I would have been in other professions. I had to assess during my life my abilities and as well as interests, and also the barriers that I might face. Some of my abilities, I'm creative. I'm a creative person. I'm an artist. I'm also a creative art historian, I believe. I'm also a very persistent person. I can stick with a task and work very hard at it. I'm very well organized. I can readily admit that. And Harold, will you agree that I'm very well organized? Okay, thank you. And inventive. And we'll talk about one of the things that has resulted from inventiveness later on, our ongoing salon with friends. The barriers that I faced were race. I'm African American, and I was told by my family, by my community from a very early age that I was going to face a lot of barriers because of my race. And in a certain sense, I did. And I had to take into account those barriers in terms of what I could choose to do or what I wanted to push myself to do. And my sexual orientation also I perceived as a barrier, because was I going to be out to the people that I was working with and working for or not? How would that hold me back? How would that help me? I felt that it might hold me back if I disclosed. So those are things that I had to consider. But an important part of my life has been my mentors, and there have been several. People who opened my eyes to possibilities that I could never have conceived of on my own. And people who helped me understand things that I would never have understood on my own. One of them was a man who owned an art gallery in downtown Detroit at one time. I'll give you his name. His name was Bob Hanamura, and he had Hanamura's gallery down on Harmony Park. This man opened my eyes to a world of creativity and possibilities of using one's creative talents that, frankly, I was not getting in school. And that's not to blame the school. It just didn't happen that way. This is how it happened. Another person, though, I think she's in the audience actually, is my dear friend Linda Downs, whom I met when I worked at the, excuse me, I'm getting a little emotional about this. When I met at the DIA, at the Detroit Institute of Arts, when I worked there as an education curator. Linda and I shared an office. I'd love to tell people that, because there wasn't an office for me when I started working there, And Linda offered to share her office with me. And we did for several years. And it was through Linda that I learned to appreciate the beauty and vastness of art history, studying art history. And it was the result of working with Linda that I made the decision to become an art historian. And that's why I went to University of Michigan and got my PhD, so that I could work in the museum as a curator of an area or teach, and I chose to teach. But my initial interest was always architecture. I wanted to be an architect, but I didn't know anybody who was an architect, and I didn't know how one went about being an architect except that you went to school. But I never bothered or knew to ask someone how you navigated that situation and did that. But I did go to work in an architectural office in Detroit as a draftsman because of my abilities. And I realized after working there for a period of time that architecture wasn't going to work for me because I couldn't be the kind of architect that I dreamed of being, and I would end up working in a big bureaucracy in which talent, in my opinion, is squashed. Sorry about that, anybody who's out there planning to be an architect. When I was introduced to Harold, this is after longtime partner number 1 and longtime partner number 2, who died of complications of AIDS. When I met Harold, that has been the most recent redirecting point in my life. Meeting Harold, I decided I would move to New York, retire and move to New York. There's a story there, but we can't go in, we don't have time for it. Living with him has opened my life up to so much, not just being in New York, but Harold's world, which is vast and exciting and wonderful. And it was through Harold that several things happened. One of which is that I returned to painting. Another of which is that I became more aware of being Black and how wonderful and important that is to me. So Harold, I'm going to throw it to you now.
Okay, life-changing events. Obviously, activism is very much a part of my life. And we've talked about where did it begin? Because though I said I'm a secular Jew, I only went to 2 years Hebrew school, never had any religious training, and I wasn't bar mitzvah. So it was a very different path. But what I got from it, though, was one of the principles of Judaism is making the world a better place. That somehow you've got to do something. You don't change it entirely, obviously, but you do something to contribute so something has happened because you've been here. And in thinking back, I realized the beginning of my activism, in a sense, began after my arrest and in the detention home, and looking around at all the other teens. They were all obviously boys. And looking at all of them, I didn't see one who looked like me. What I saw was either all Black teenagers. This was California, so it was all Mexican American teenagers, or what I then would have labeled Appalachian, thin, scrawny, but no one who looked like or acted like me, a middle-class Jewish kid. And it became immediately apparent to me that I was another outsider, just like they were. I was part of the discarded people. And I think, though I couldn't have articulated it as clearly as I am now, I knew that sense. And that said, I'm more like them than the other people. And I'm being seen that way. So that, I think, was the beginning in the sense of my awareness of minorities, oppression, and the basis of my activism. Then the second important event was when I made the decision to leave California and move to Chicago. I didn't know what it meant. All I knew was in my head, I said, if I stay in California around my family, I'm going to be smothered. And that was as far as I could conceptualize it. And I realize now that that move to Chicago was not only to live a gay lifestyle, but it was also to, in a sense, as I say, opening up the door to my potential. Because what happened was I had no contact with my family for many years. And so I was free to move and develop and grow into any area. And then once I went back to school, I worked for a couple of years. My lover convinced me to go back to school. I thought I was not bright enough. And I had one assignments in a class was reading the book On Liberty by John Stuart Mill. And that was one of those absolute experiences where every page, every paragraph, light bulbs went off. It was one of the most expanding experiences I had ever had. And I went back to school, furthered my activism, was in pre-med, doing very well. And I had a psych teacher, and there was a substitute, a woman who came in. I really liked her. I went to her after the class, and I said to her, you know, I'm in pre-med. I want to become a psychiatrist, but I'm not happy with what it's teaching me. I want more about society, more about the world around, not just physiology and individual. And she's talked to me, oh, if there's at the University of Chicago, there's this interdisciplinary department. Well, needless to say, I went for an interview, I was accepted, got a scholarship, and my life changed dramatically. This was a 15-minute conversation with a woman that I never saw again, but my life changed. And I say that because you never know the influence you'll have on somebody. What you might think was a casual comment, it can change their direction. And I jumped to another significant moment. Once I got my PhD, I moved to New York, I started working, and I got involved. I was working in a community mental health program in one of the worst slums of New York at the time. And it became apparent of the racism in the facility against not only the people they served, but against the community workers who were Black and Hispanic. And a protest began. I got involved in the protest. And I was one of the few professionals who did. And what was important about that was that after weeks of protest, we got news that arrests were going to be made, and I was asked to be one of those arrested. And so I literally spent a sleepless night because this was my first job. What was I going to do? How could I risk my future? How could I? And it basically came down to, if not now, when? A simple statement. And I went in the next day to become arrested. And what happened was I was thrust into leadership position, which began a career of moving into both local, federal, national, and international activism around gay issues. Okay.
We're going to have to stop, so maybe we'll have a chance to cover the few more points later on, okay?
Okay.
So, we're trying to work within these, what we've been given. Is, you know, it's the way it goes, folks. Just think of Rachel Maddow and, you know, okay. So we go to the last section. The last section is our black and white marriage. Here we go. My parents were married for almost 50 years. My father died a month before their 50th anniversary. And from my parents, I learned that, or came to appreciate, that kind of relationship. There were problems. Any marriage is going to have problems, obviously. But there were problems, but they stayed married to each other. And I think that they were not necessarily faithful partners, but they were certainly loving partners to one another. So that's what I learned, and that's what I wanted out of my life. I wanted a stable, long-term relationship. And as I said earlier, I had 3. My first partner cheated on me and left. My second partner died from complications of AIDS after us being 16 years together. And it was 2 years after his death that I was introduced to Harold through mutual friends. And when I met Harold, it didn't take me long to realize I wanted to be with this guy. And I think those seeing him in Zoom, I hope you understand what there is about him that's so appealing. There are lots of other things that are appealing that you're not going to know about in this talk, but he's a very appealing guy. And so I left. I retired from my job in Cleveland as an associate dean and teaching, moved to New York, and here we are, right here. Harold is one of, as I said, 3 long-term partners, all of whom, like Harold, were white. White men have been very much a part of my life ever since grade school. I started my schooling, my first grade school, it was the all-black school in Detroit, but my parents moved to a neighborhood and then sent me to an all-white Catholic school. So from that point on, I was around white people and white men to whom I was attracted. And I've always used that as an explanation for why my partners were white. It was simply proximity, shared interests, similar paths, all that sort of thing. But recently, Harold and I had a conversation one morning, and ever since the start of COVID and the lockdown and being at home 24/7 together, we instituted having a morning breakfast conversation in which we can talk about anything for an hour and then go about our business. And the question came up again in preparing for this conversation. John, why have your partners always been white? And it was one of those revelatory moments. I said, Harold, you know, I think the reason is because I felt the cloak of white privilege in having a white partner. I could navigate spaces that I could not navigate on my own as a black man, as a black person. I had a sense of protection. I had a sense of an entree to parts of the world that I felt otherwise were closed off to me. And for the first time in all the years, these 19 years that I've been answering this question from Harold, this is the first time that he felt that he got a satisfactory answer. And it really was a satisfactory answer to me, even though in many ways it was upsetting and embarrassing to have to admit that I felt that I needed the cloak of white privilege to survive in this world. But that's the way it was. I was a gay widower because my late partner died, complications of AIDS, when I met Harold. Harold was also a gay widower. And when we got together, our late partners were very much a part of our lives. We didn't want to forget them. We wanted to talk about them whenever the occasion arose, to talk about things that we did with our late partners, the ways in which we lived with our late partners that were different from the way Harold and I were living together. They had to be part of our lives. And the fact that we both were widowers made that work very well. But meeting Harold also was taking a chance. I was 59 years old when I was introduced to Harold, living in Cleveland, as I said. He was living in New York. Virtually all of my friends said, John, don't go to New York. You only know this guy a short period of time. It was basically a year. You've known him a short period of time. You're 59 years old. You're settled. You have everything you want and need in Cleveland. Why do you want to risk all of that? And I said to myself, it's worth the risk. It's worth the risk to take a chance on this guy who I felt was really worth the chance. And I can say in front of all these people, Harold, I love you. I still do, after 19 years. I took the chance. We had a rough ride. It was difficult. You know, two old men getting together and settled in their ways is a very difficult thing to manage. But we talk, we fight, we battle, we stop speaking to each other, we get mad, but we come back. We come back and we try to work it out. We try to identify what the problems are. We try to work on the solutions. And some things are still ongoing, of course. Okay. This is for Harold and both of us. 5 years ago, when Ta-Nehisi Coates published his book, Between the World and Me, we thought that that would be an excellent basis for bringing friends together for a periodic meeting to discuss race and racism. And we call that the Salon. And we've been meeting for 5 years with friends. During COVID, about every couple of months now. And this has just opened me up completely to being Black, gay, everything, accepting myself in a way that I never have accepted up until this time. I'm done. Your turn.
My turn. Okay. I think what's important is that John is the first Black man that I've ever had an emotional relationship with as a lover. Yes, I've had Black friends, occasional sexual partners, but that people made an assumption who don't know me. They assume that I'm one of those gay men who's only attracted to Black men, when it's actually just the opposite. I met John through a friend of mine, Ruth, who I've known since I was 19 years old, a non-gay woman who I spent time with, and she talked with a friend of hers who lived in Cleveland. And I got an email once I came back from visiting her saying, would you be interested? This friend of mine said, oh, he has this very good friend who's a gay man, he's Black. He was in a relationship for 16 years, man died, and he's probably in his 50s. That's all I knew. And I wrote back to Ruth and said, hey, someone's being introduced to me. I was 65. I was not looking to be in a relationship. My life was very full, very rich. And so I said, fine. And so he wrote. I said, fine to her. Then she wrote to her friend. Within a couple of days, I got a long email from John. And his opening line just totally got me, because his line was, my yenta says I should write you. Now, for those of you who don't know what a yenta is, in old Jewish tradition, it's the matchmaker. So he was clearly telling me, hey, I'm interested in a relationship. And so we started corresponding. And that went on for about, I would say, a couple of months. And then we started talking on the phone. And we talked for 45 minutes the first time, which for me, with a stranger, is unheard of. And I put down the phone and I realized I had said more to him at a greater depth and interest than I had with the man that I had been seeing for about 3 years. And we then made arrangements after talking on the phone for about another month or two that I would come to Cleveland. And he wanted to send me a picture because he kept saying, don't you want to know what I look like? Okay, and I said no, because I wanted to get to know the person first. And that has been the first time in my life that I actually started a relationship with someone based on who they were, not because I had a sexual interest. And that led in our relationship for us to be dealing with me as a white man. What signs of racism did I have? I knew I was enough into activism to know that I knew I was not a bigot, but I knew that I had racist feelings. There was no way I could have avoided them being in this country. And so this salon has been very important because even though it was majority white people, it went very fast into white privilege and looking at how we see it, how we experience it. And to me, that has been one of the most important parts of the salon and our relationship, is that we both accept that as a white man, there is going to be racist thoughts and feelings. There's no way to avoid that. But it's not a question of how much, well, I should say it is a question of how much, not, oh, do you or don't you? And so it's a constant exploration. And like John was saying about the salon and our morning conversations, constantly every day, we have this special time where we can just simply explore. And it's the reason why I had to work against my initial feelings about my attraction to John, because I had to learn how to be attracted to him. I knew very clearly this was a special person, someone unlike I had ever met before in my life. But I also knew I had my own barriers that I had to work on. And so being in the relationship is in some way, as one of my friends said, you're bringing your politics into your relationship. Because being with John, in a real sense for me, has been being able to become the kind of person that I've always wanted to be, but never felt I could be.
Oh,
I'm done.
wow. What a surprise. Listen, folks, I now know how Joy Reid feels when she's talking to the camera, and she knows people are out there, but where are they? I wish I could see them and get something back. You know, it's so this second hour is devoted to questions and answers, and we're turning over the proceedings to Leo, who's going to handle this, I believe. There are points that I think neither of us were able to raise in our talking. So hopefully we'll be able to, questions will touch on things that will allow us to say a bit more about ourselves. So Leo?
Could
I'm
I
gonna
just,
ask Patrick to join us as well.
Patrick and Leo, okay.
Go ahead, Harold.
there's one thing I felt, of all the things I wanted to say that I didn't, I'd like to say this about significant moments. in that I felt a very, very important moment was when a couple of years ago, John and I went into a 8-week spiritual aging workshop. And in the workshop, we had to talk about our life. And when I made the decision to make my declaration of what my life was about, because of other things that had happened, I decided for the first time to not tell my life as the tragedy, you know, the tragedy of being arrested, the tragedy of my family abandoning me, et cetera, et cetera. And it always was this poor me kind of, and I made a decision, I would do it differently. And to see the arrest as a blessing, because I didn't have to spend 25 years in the closet. My family's, quotes, abandoned me. Well, point was, I left them so I could be free. So it was a blessing. And so I say, and I was in my 80s when this happened, or late 70s, of learning to reevaluate my life from a different perspective so that I could move forward and see the positives of what my life was about. Change the narrative that I had been carrying for almost 60, 70 years. Okay, I'm done.
So John and Harold, hi, I'm Patrick Field. I'm the Alumni and Donor Relations Officer for the College of Fine Performing and Communication Arts. If you two want to unpin your videos and go into gallery mode, you'll be able to see everybody's faces that's on the call.
Oh my God.
And there's also, you can scroll to the left and to the right because there's more than one screen. So we're gonna, there's a couple questions that came in the chat, and then there's also some that came in through the RSVP. So we're gonna just ask you those questions right now.
Scroll, I see the scrolling. Oh, a lot of people are not visible for some reason.
They can feel free to turn on their cameras if they want.
Okay. Oh my God, look at all those familiar faces. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Ruth.
Okay.
Patrick?
So, so one of the questions is, how do you see the coming out experience in today's world as compared to when you first came out?
Yeah. Harold, do you want to take that?
Yeah, okay. I've talked to a lot of younger people, and yes, clearly it's very different. But what I've gotten from a lot of people is that it's different in that the process is much, much faster. That their families are more attuned, more accepting. Many don't go through the being excluded or kicked out, but that almost everyone says there is that period of having to kind of accept yourself. The youngest ones, the ones who are in their 20s and 30s, I don't have as much contact with, but what I'm hearing, for many of them, it's a very smooth transition because of what they see on television, what they see in the news. They see much more an array of role models that they can look to. So I think a lot of what I have come through, and a lot of people like me, it's because of our age. We are from different generations. I mean, you see it in the streets, in the sense of the young people who are in the streets, who understand things politically that I never really understood conceptually till I was much older. So I think it's important. You'd have to be talking to some of those questions, asking those questions of people who are much younger.
Here's another question. And I'm gonna, since you already answered a couple parts of it, I'm gonna go to the last part. It says, how do you both stay so young?
Believe me, I'm jumping in on this one. We are not young, first of all. I'm 78, Harold is 84. We know how old we are. We have lived these years. And we are, I think, I use the word lucky. Harold doesn't like that term. But we're lucky, I think, by our genetic makeup, first of all. And also by the fact that we both take good care of ourselves individually and of each other. I watch my health and I watch his health, but he makes his own health determinations just as I make my own health determinations. We watch our diet. We both exercise, much more pre-COVID, but we both have an exercise routine on a weekly basis. And we try to de-stress our lives. And the morning conversation is a great distressor. We have confronted many issues that were lying like little, bombs all over the place, grenades or whatever. We've tackled a lot of those issues, some without resolution, but they're out in the open. De-stressing, getting enough sleep, not obsessing over what's going on politically, although how it's so difficult not to obsess about it, but to take some positive action to channel that anxiety. And we both decided this year to be poll workers, and we applied to be poll workers in New York. We were accepted, and we went to a four-hour training class, and we passed the exam, and we will be placed in a polling place somewhere, presumably in Manhattan or in New York, on November 3rd, starting at 5 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. But that's how we decided to do something to deal with all of that out there. Okay.
I'd like to add something to that. I believe each of us has to be in charge of our own health care. I've been HIV positive since 1987, was given an AIDS diagnosis in 1993. And 3 times during that period, I went against medical advice, and if I hadn't, I'd be dead. So I've taken charge so that I see physicians, acupuncturists, chiropractors, everybody in my life as my consultants. I ultimately have to make every decision about my health care. It's me, it's my body. I sense best what needs to be done. And I think that's really important, because even back in 1981, when GRID was around, the gay-related immune deficiency, and no one knew what caused it, they were throwing medications right and left at people, experimental. And my reaction was, no, if it's the immune system, then I'll do everything I can to support the immune system and not take in toxic medications. And that's been my philosophy for the last almost 40 years now. It's about looking at and supporting the natural healer inside.
I want to tag on Harold. I'm HIV negative and have been, obviously. My late partner, I said, died from complications of AIDS. Harold is HIV positive. I knew that going into our relationship, that he was HIV positive. And it didn't stop me for a moment, because we both came to an agreement as to how we would lead our sexual lives. We are monogamous and have been. That's our choice. That's not a rule for anybody else, but that's how it works for us. and we use safer sex practices. I won't go into any details, but I'll just say that we know how this virus is transmitted, and just as we know how COVID is transmitted, and we try to live accordingly.
Oh, okay. This one came in the chat, and it was more of a comment, but I'm going to turn it into a question. So Daniel comments that Harold's comments fit well into the concept of self-actualization. And one of those, he gave an example, is getting enjoyment and satisfaction out of the present moment. Maybe share an example of how that relates to your own personal experience. Getting enjoyment and satisfaction out of the present moment.
You want to do that, Sean? I got distracted from the chats. I forgot.
Okay. How to get satisfaction out of the present moment? Well, out of life in a COVID environment. I chose our nearly 6 months of confinement and isolation to write a novel. I couldn't work in my studio because I would have to travel by public transportation, which was discouraged during the lockdown of COVID. So I brought my computer home to our apartment and I wrote a novel. That occupied my time. That let me unburden myself of a lot of thoughts that I had about particular issues. And by the way, it's my second novel. I'm going to reach and show you my first, which I self-published. It's called Domus Niger, and it is basically a story about a Black family that originates in the South and then disperses across the country. There are several characters who are LGBTQ in it. There's lots of sex in it. But it's a story about how one self-actualizes coming from a really disadvantaged situation and making a hopeful and satisfying life for themselves. It's available through Amazon. That's the end of the commercial.
Patrick?
Next question, and this is kind of related to the COVID comment from earlier, just the last question before. Each of you has lived through some of the most culturally and politically significant periods for the LGBTQ community in US modern history. Would you say that your experiences during those periods affected your approach to the COVID pandemic? And if so, how?
Oh. For me, it's very easy to answer that. In a way, those of us who were alive during the 80s, we've already been through a pandemic. We know what it's like. So that this is not a new experience for us. I think what's different in this experience is that for many of us, for a number of years, we felt like we were in the Warsaw Ghetto, where people were dying, whereas around the ghetto, everyone was acting like life was normal. You know, remember during AIDS and GRID, we had to fight with the New York Times to get them to print articles. The president never even talked about AIDS for many years. So we are very prepared, I think, to deal with this pandemic. And I think I've been very blessed in having gone through all of those periods in the past where there's been so much upheaval. It also gives me the ability to have faith in the future. And that was the comment I wanted to make in terms of enjoying the present, is that a lot of people ask me, well, how is this different, for example, of what's happening in the streets, the protests? How is this any different than the 60s? And for me, one of the first things I say is, it's no different for Blacks who've had to deal with this all their lives for centuries. But for whites were involved in the protests in the 60s because they were marching for Blacks and justice. Now, whites are marching with, because they understand this is affecting them as well. And so I can see this and say, I think it's very positive what's happening. That by having gone through these experiences, we see the differences between then and now. And that gives me encouragement.
Harold, I want to tag on and I want to come at it from a different perspective. One thing that I didn't cover in our conversation, when I went to Vietnam for a year, as I said, I was an infantry lieutenant in combat. We were in a combat situation in an area just west of Saigon, a little northwest of Saigon, going towards the Cambodian border. And I was stationed there for a year, and I was there during the period of the Tet Offensive in 1968. Being in a war is unlike anything else one can imagine in one's life. Death is not just a theoretical, it is a reality. Because people are dying around you literally every day, quite unexpectedly and quite often horribly. And it made that experience of seeing all these young men, and let's not forget the Vietnamese civilians as well, far more of them than of us Americans. People dying all around you, horribly. It made me realize that I lived in an illusion that I had a certain period of life to live. I was in my 20s when I was in the Army in Vietnam, and I was imagining I would have a life extending out somewhere, I don't know where, but out there for several decades. And that was an illusion. That was a complete and total illusion. And that changed my thinking about everything when I returned from Vietnam. I decided that whatever I wanted to do, however I wanted to do it, I damn well better get busy doing it, because there was no guarantee. There was no guarantee of a tomorrow or a next week, a next month, a next year. There was no guarantee. There is no guarantee. And that really set me very firmly on a path to do what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, how I wanted to do it. Another thing that helped me was my late partner, who died of complications of AIDS, was a recovering alcoholic. And a lot of troubles occurred in our relationship, mainly generated by me. And he suggested to me that I attend a 12-step program for people who are living with alcoholics or recovering alcoholics. And I did. And I've been attending that 12-step program since the early 1980s. That experience, which is ongoing, has completely altered my state again in a different way. And that is, it made me confront who I am. And I have been opened up to embrace learning constantly in a truthful and honest way who and what I am, and being able to share with others who and what I am. And I think it has allowed me to be very direct, very clear, and very unguarded with almost anyone that I encounter. That is an incredible gift that I've gotten from being in 12-step program. To be unguarded, to be open, to be genuine, to be real. Patrick, I think you have your mute on.
I do. Okay, this one comes from Spencer. And since I can't see very well, bear with me. When you talk about the steps of coming out and community acceptance, do you find that this community acceptance journey might have looked different for the two of you given the difference of race? Or do you find that your journeys of acceptance within the LGBTQ plus community were similar? And then a follow-up, do you think that journey would look similar or different if it happened today?
Harold, why don't you go?
Okay. I would say one of a colleague that have been working with on doing this other presentation is a trans person. They identify as a non-binary trans person. And through my work with SAGE, which is an organization dealing with LGBTQ elders, I've come across many, many other groups, so that I think the question is, maybe for some gays, some lesbians, it's very different than it was. But for trans people, for people who choose to identify as non-binary, etc., I think it's just as difficult. Because in our community, even though we say LGBTQ, there are many who don't accept trans people. So, you know, I think things are shifting, but we still have groups that are not being accepted and do have a community, but it's not the larger community.
Well, I'll just simply add that as a Black man, I have experienced racism in the gay community. It's not across the board, but there have been very significant instances where I felt I was not wanted, or I was just simply ignored, or I was actually excluded. Fortunately, as I say, that's not across the board. I've had wonderful gay friends, male and female, and trans. So I have participated in portions of the gay community, not the gay community as a whole. I don't feel I can navigate the gay community as a whole. When Harold and I used to visit our friend who had a home on Fire Island, I've always felt uncomfortable in that community, not within that home, but in that community. I felt I did not belong. Patrick, you're muted.
My etiquette is so strong, I can't. So that's all the questions that we have in the chat. Did anybody have another question for John or Harold that they wanted to put in the chat at this time?
I'm going to say hello to some people that I see out there.
Okay.
That I know. Hi, I see you. Yes, I'm so glad you're here. Wow, this is incredible. This is totally incredible.
In fact, I want to say the Ruth Richard is the Ruth I was talking about as the woman who introduced John and me.
Oh, that's awesome.
I also promised when we were planning that I would give people a glimpse of my studio. What I'm in right now is only part of my studio. It's the studio where I put the paintings up, and Frank, you can show us your painting. I'm on what I call the gallery side of the studio. So I will lift this up so that you can see into the space and some of the paintings there. They're more around, but I'm not going to walk around the room with the computer. Anyway, the other side of the studio is where I actually work, and you know, it looks like a studio. I mean, you know, lots of stuff. This is the tidy side. So there's that. By the way, many of these paintings.
You don't have an untidy side.
Harold, you're not to give away my secrets, please. Many of the paintings that are up now, and which I put up because I was planning to have an exhibition here open to everyone, but COVID changed those plans. So these are paintings that I did in recent year, based upon photographs that I took when Harold and I traveled to West Africa, to the countries of Ghana, Togo, and Benin.
Frank, John.
Sorry?
Frank is in front of one of your.
I know. Yeah, Frank Stark has one of my paintings. There you are, Frank. Thank you, Frank, for that painting. And there's one directly behind me. These are photographs of people that I saw, not so much met. There wasn't really a lot of opportunity to actually engage with people, but simply say, may I take your picture? And that's what I did. And then I made a series of these paintings. So where are we, Patrick?
So there's another question, couple questions that came in from Infinity. I'm gonna actually, since she has a couple, I'm gonna unmute her and let her ask her questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
No?
No?
Okay, oh, I see, okay. I will read it. She's working. She's the young lady with the mask on. So she's probably on campus at Wayne State. Okay. Pigtailing off of what you just said, I was wondering if you could tell us how the interdiscrimination within the gender and sexuality spectrum has evolved. Meaning, does it seem that certain letters of LGBTQIA+++ are more or less accepting than they have been in the past?
Harold, that's your bailiwick.
Yeah. When you asked the question, I immediately thought to the first gay pride, the first gay pride march. And Sylvia Rivera was a transvestite, possibly might be considered, if she had lived, a transsexual, I don't know. But she tried to get on the stage. She was one of the original people at Stonewall, and they kicked her off the stage. And my reaction was, I'm not sure this is a movement that I want to be part of, because Sylvia and Marsha Johnson were people who, as well as some lesbians at Stonewall, who fought back. And the misogyny and the prejudice against trans people, transvestites, is still there. It's less, it's much less now. But talk with many trans people, and they will say, it's still a big problem. Just as racism is still a problem. It's not a question of is it or is it not. It's a question of how much.
And then the follow-up would be, how do you think we should go forward with trying to make the community more accepting of itself, the total community?
I think it's going to happen as many of the older folk who still have it inside die out. I mean, when I started getting involved with the senior programs back in the 70s and 80s, I saw men my age, white men, who were absolute and totally misogynist. And it was only AIDS that brought the lesbian community closer to the gay men. You know, it was their work. It wasn't that the gay men reached out, you know, so that, you know, it just is a constant process. It's talking to each of us, to when you hear the remarks, you know, we live, unfortunately, in a very misogynist culture, and that is reflected in our community as well. But there is hope. The younger people have really moved far. They don't see discrimination or don't make the discrimination. They're much more open about sexuality, about identity, about people who don't want to label themselves. They're not as, they don't, it doesn't feel they need to identify a person into a category. They're more open to just simply seeing the person.
Okay. Okay, so are there, I guess there's no more questions in the chat. So are there any last words that you two would like to say before we finish up?
Harold, there were a couple of points that I'm not sure you got to in interracial marriage. Did you want to tackle those?
No, I feel we.
You think we said enough? Harold, you think you said enough?
I just think it's a constant process. That's all. I mean, you know, I'm thinking, you know, when the question that came back a little while ago about how do we, quote, stay young. You know, one of the things I deal with in my book is that I say two of the most insulting phrases around age are when you say to a young person, oh, you're really wise for your years, or saying to an older person, oh, you're young at heart. Both of those are insults because it's using some other age period to describe oneself. You know, one can be 84 years old and be alive and be vibrant and still be growing and still have aches and pains, etc. And because I'm exploring, John and I both have gotten these comments, but they think that saying, oh, you're really young. No, we're not young. We're just alive. We're vibrant. We're still growing. You know, and someone 20 and 30 years old who is very wise is very wise. They're not wise for their years, they're wise. You know, and so I think we need to sort of reevaluate, in a sense, the questions we ask of people. John?
I think I'm talked out right now. But I hate to let go of this because this is such a rare thing that can happen, to have wonderful people. I mean, people I haven't seen in years, you know, all right here, people, and, you know, and people who live in the neighborhood as well. I just like want to keep talking, but you know, we would be getting off our purpose for being here. I want to thank the entire team at Wayne State University for the incredible job that they have done in organizing this, in promoting it, and in bringing us into it, and letting us, these two old men, have their say in this public forum. But each one of you, certainly I owe a debt of gratitude to, but I want to say especially to Allison. Allison is the development officer for the college that has sponsored this occasion. Allison is recently new to her job, and she was coming to New York periodically to meet with alumni to bring us up to date on what's going on at the university and keep us in contact, and all the things the development officer wants to do or needs to do. I have found Allison to be one of the most open, intelligent, thoughtful, detail-oriented, just kind and generous and sweet and lovely person I have ever encountered in my life. Allison, you are the best. Wayne State is so lucky to have you, as well as all of your co-workers at the university. All of you make me proud of my alma mater. You really do make me very proud that Wayne continues to be a wonderful, vital institution in Detroit through all of Detroit's miseries, all of Detroit's problems, all of Detroit's issues. There is Wayne, a kind of shining beacon in the city and the state and for the country and the world. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate all that you've done and all that we still hope to share in the future.
Thank you so much, John. I couldn't be more honored to hear that from you and from Harold. And getting to know you both has been just such a reward in and of itself. You consistently inspire me with your love for the arts, your creative expression, your intellect, and your incredible life stories. And I think that's why we really wanted to share that with our Wayne State community here in Detroit. And of course, with so many of your wonderful friends who have joined us today. We're just so grateful to you and Harold for this glimpse into your authentic selves, into your lives, and really truly fortunate to have you as a Wayne State alum. Thank you.
Thank you. One final note. For those of you who would like to continue in contact with me, Harold has offered a way of contacting him. But for those of you who'd like to remain in contact with me, please go to my website. I think that's in the announcement or somewhere, but I'll tell you what it is. It's johnhunternyc.com. johnhunternyc.com. Go there and there's a way to contact me, and then we can exchange emails or telephone conversations or whatever. And you'll also get to see my paintings, which is another plug.
Okay, so I think that's everything. So I just want to thank everyone for coming today as we celebrate Coming Out Week at Wayne State University. We'd like to thank Dr. Hunter and Dr. Kooden, or John and Harold, as we've come to know them today, for spending time, this time sharing their journey with us. We'd also like to thank the college, or the Office of Multicultural Student Engagement, for partnering with the College of Fine Performing and Communication Arts on this event. It was a great collaboration for coming together, and we want to again thank you all for coming, and have a great day.